All right, now, as I set up for where the toes are going to be protruding, I really want to kind of even this out. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, but as I scale it down and then move it forward, I'll end up with a much kind of cleaner set of edges here to work with. I also want to start looking at taking the pinky side of the foot, the pinky toe side, and making it a little narrower top to bottom. So we'll bring that down a bit. And if I have to, we'll go right in here and we'll scale and then move that back down. So that actually works pretty well. Our geometry is by no means perfect, but after we get a little bit farther, we'll see that we can actually get all of this to clean up rather nicely. So now as we scale that down, I'm going to look at it, and I also see that I'm not wide enough. Turn our soft selection back on so we can have that kind of transition back through a larger area of the foot. We're going to scale that a little bit wider, and then we're going to move it over to kind of line back up with our photos. So in the photos, basically, and in this model, the foot is going to be slightly turned. So it's going to be turned a little bit to the outside. So let's go back in and actually do that. So we want this part of the foot to angle out. So we also want all that geometry to flow that direction. So as we move things around a little bit, we'll see that we get a much kind of smoother transition out into that part of the foot. So I'm going to take and use the Shift key to look at all of that geometry. Now, right there, that's going to follow all the way around the back of the foot. And that's not what I want. So I want to grab right there and deselect those. And I'm going to add, make this full screen so we can see a little better, the edges here that flow around the bottom of the foot. And we're going to flow connect through these. So we're going to loops flow connect, and that's going to give me some geometry that's absolutely not perfect in a couple of spots, but is easily fixable. So now that I've got the flow kind of reorganized here, I'm going to grab and we're going to target weld a couple of these vertices out of here. So now I need to move that back up where I want it and readjust the flow through the foot. So we're going to have to kind of manipulate and move things around a little bit and readjust that flow, and we may end up going back and relaxing a bit. But what this is going to do for me is allow me to have the geometry flowing in the direction that I want, as well as, again, keeping all quads. So even though there were a couple tries there, it's pretty easy to fix those. And now I have cleaner geometry, and the last set of polys here at the end of the foot is one continuous loop. So when I shift drag there, it grabs all the way around those polys for me, which then allows me to have much better control. And now this set of edges flows around the foot, doesn't flow back up into the body. Again, allows me to have a little bit more control over how all of this is going to work. So there are times where we have to kind of fix the geometry just because of the way things work. So now let's actually take the scale tool, make it go based on view, and we're going to scale a little bit there to flatten that out a little bit more. And then we're going to again rotate it and move it so it fits back in with our geometry. So we'll move it back out to the side just a little bit. And now I'm going to shift drag it forward one more, which should bring me out to pretty much where the toes are going to emanate. So now as we look at this, we want to start really thinking, just like we did with the fingers, how we're going to build toes. So the toes aren't really a whole lot different than the fingers are. We just have to think about them as little mini fingers. So really is kind of how they work. So as we start building this geometry here, I just want to really think about where that's going to work. So the big toe is obviously going to take up a little bit more volume than the pinky toe does. But as we really look at the geometry, we want to think about how we're going to bridge certain edges together to create that structure. So if I were to bridge these two, and then cap this right here, I have two quads that I can use to basically extrude my toe. The downside is that I don't really have enough geometry horizontally to do that with. So capping vertically across here, and we saw how to fix it with the fingers, but it may end up making life a little bit easier to just kind of deal with this a little bit differently. So we're going to end up capping off the whole end of the foot here. So let's go through, grab all of these edges, and see what makes sense as far as how this is going to bridge. So when I bridge all that together, I get a nice even structure, and then we grab our last open border here and we cap it. Again, the only downside here is that I don't have any geometry horizontally across this. So if we look at taking all of those polys, make this full screen, and we do an inset. The inset right here, make sure we don't cross anything over. The inset right here is going to allow this to have a bit more geometry flowing in around the sides. Now, it's still not exactly what I want, so I'm going to grab my two little end caps here and we're going to delete those. Then I'm going to grab all of these edges here and we're going to add a connect. Now, the connect, as we see, doesn't actually give me a quad. What it does, I can make basically a quad and a triangle, but if I add another segment here, it's going to allow me to do exactly what I want. So we're going to add a bridge right there with a single segment. Actually, we're going to add a bridge right there with a two segment, so that's going to end up being a quad. And then we bridge right there with two segments. And then this caps as a quad. And then we'll end up having a whole lot more geometry at the tip of the toes to form nice rounded toes. So what we can do now is we can basically go in and we can select all this geometry. Now, if I select bi-angle and turn on ignore back facing, when I click on one polygon, it's going to select every poly within 45 degrees, but not past 45 degrees. And since everything else here is about a 90-degree angle change, it's going to end up making that work pretty nicely. Now, if I go into my relax tool, it's only going to relax within those selected faces. So if I don't want to be pulling the edge out there, so we'll undo that. And I'm going to shrink it by one set of polys. So what that's going to do is it's going to make it so that this outer edge is not touched by my relax tool. So now as I relax, I'm relaxing those inner polygons, softening up that transition in there and opening everything up without affecting the rest of the foot. So then if I really want, I can up the brush strength a little bit more so this goes a little bit faster and I can soften it up a little bit more efficiently. So now when we go back, we'll have better geometry that we can grab to create those toes with.